another session of Toward a Quality of Life, coming to you from the Washington Park Mall in Roxbury, the Cable Vision studio for BNN TV. It is Thursday, September 24th, approximately 7 p.m.
1998.
With me in the studio are 7 persons, besides myself, helping to make this show happen. And they do this most every night, bringing you some of the most direct and serious, non-commercial kind of television that is very important to all of our lives. My talk to you for this evening is entitled Sex Vigilantes, Who's Got the Problem? It's about the way we are asleep at the wheel over our human rights, which we see being trampled upon in the situation that is happening to the person who is president of this country at the current time,
Bill Clinton.
What we want to ask is, did the person known as President Clinton really lie? That is, technically and de facto. Is what he did a lie? If you watched any of his 4-hour videotape testimony, you would have seen a person who was extraordinarily adept at ways of presenting oneself in a legal situation, and ways of being extraordinarily conversant with the ins and outs of what it means to be in the midst of a judicial situation for oneself, and how to be technically succinct and expert about it. And technically succinct is the way our law has evolved, justifiably or unjustifiably, but it is the nature of our law today, and if one is involved in law, that is the way one has to proceed. Did the president lie de facto about sex if, in being called on the carpet or found out, so to speak, about sex, he tried to keep it to himself? He tried to not divulge it to the entire world. He tried to not make it a matter for all the world to devour with the world's appetite for prurience and knowing about the sex lives, especially of famous people, and especially of someone whom I'm told has been called by some magazines at times the sexiest man in the world. So did he lie? Did he lie in trying to do something that not only was to save his skin, so to speak, not only was to protect his family, so to speak, but was perhaps the most judicious way to proceed about a matter such as the situation he found himself in? Now, do people have a right to have sex? Is it a crime to have sex? No, it's not a crime to have sex. People do have a right to have sex. And they do have a right to treat the law as a technicality, because the law today is a myriad of technicalities. And how many of us put on the carpet for sex, both licit and illicit sex, would want to not divulge the sex we are having and tell the kinds of sex and what it involved, where we had it, and so on? How many of us would not be willing to divulge such kinds of circumstances? So that is the first matter, the matter that the sex that was talked about technically is a matter of the way law is today, which is technical. The sex that was hidden de facto is a matter perhaps of common sense, judiciousness, and what any reasonable human being might do under a similar circumstance. And the sex is not a crime, and the state perhaps does not have a right to be investigating, to begin with, the sex lives of people. Now let's also talk about the concept of Christianity. or the field of Christianity, which is coming up very heavily in this whole matter or this whole affair, because many of the people who are vociferous against the person who is the president see themselves as Christians, perhaps as fundamentalists. I don't know if they would label themselves as such, but they want to introduce more and more of so to speak, what they call Christian ideas into the national dialogue and into the national behavior, or their version of it. Let's talk a little bit about Christianity. Christianity as a matter of faith and Christianity as a matter of deed. I recently was near a hotel here when the president came to town, and during this entire dilemma, and there were many persons there who, though in the minority, were quite outspoken and noticeable and carried bigger signs and more signs than the other persons who were there, and who also portrayed themselves as being Christian, and some of their signs had slogans that read somewhat in a religious manner, such that the president is perhaps condemned and that he had to repent, and so on. This is very startling and quite a matter for everyone's consideration, because it kind of flies in the face of what Christianity truly is about in its pure essence. Christianity is a religious concept, a religious dogma, a religious basis of forgiveness and love. The famous tenet of Christianity being to love one's neighbor as one's self. The God of Christianity is a forgiving God and a merciful God, and I say all this considering that this misdeed, this misstep, this sexual affair, in fact, is not a crime and may not even be some terrible sin. That is not for me to judge. So I don't say it that even it should perhaps be being judged. I just say that to judge it, and to judge it with the tools and mores of Christianity, would not lead one to proceed perhaps the way we see people proceeding in the name of Christianity. Proceeding with condemnation, proceeding with judgment, proceeding with hatred, proceeding with anathema, proceeding with wanting to make vicious attacks and to persecute and to go after and to give no peace, to not leave someone alone, and to know what is best for another person. Christianity has so many famous tenets, some of them coming from the Gospels, and one of the most high-order tenets of Christianity is to judge not, lest ye be judged. And somehow this has been terribly missed, to judge not. How can one show oneself as Christian and be condemning and be judging? This is only for God, so to speak, to be doing. And no one knows who sits at the right hand of God. I even recall a parable like citation where people are sort of warned to be very careful whom they would cast out, to be very careful whom they would mistreat, to be very careful whom they would refuse, because that very person could be Jesus. Also, I recall something that is attributed to Jesus as he lay dying on the cross, and the mob below was frenzied for his persecution, was frenzied for his torture and suffering. And Jesus is alleged to have looked down and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So it's very important to point out what is Christianity, what is being said in the name of Christianity. Loving one's enemy, a tenet of Christianity. not casting the first stone unless you are without sin, the idea being that no one who is human is without sin. The idea of resurrection, that you can resurrect even from being human and frail and with sin. Christianity, a dogma or tenets of love and mercy, not wrath. There's no room for hatred, precisely. One is told to turn the other cheek. One is told to forgive. Again, I say there's nothing to forgive, but according to the tenets, even for transgressions, one is told to find it in one's heart somehow to forgive. It's also true that the president is not married to anyone in the country other than his wife Hillary. So regarding the sin or any transgression of that variety, there'd be no obligation, no contract, no responsibility, no law, no oath that would say that the president must remain faithful sexually to any one of us. He is not married to us, and such situations are not covered within the oath of his office besides that. Then we come to the question of truth. Everybody says he or she wants the truth, or many people say that. And now more hearings, as I talked to you on this September 24th, more hearings are being scheduled to get more truth, more information, as many people have said. How much more truth do we need? Have we not seen it all? We know the president is not telling all. Isn't it wise to not tell all? Who would not tell all? But regarding the truth, what kind of a truth are we talking about? A, when we go after somebody for sex, and in a previous session I outlined all the misguided, misappropriate, inappropriate ways that the so-called investigation, or as some people call it, inquisition, has been carried out to get to this truth, that a truth, even a transgression, a truth of transgression cannot be arrived at if the means by which you're getting there are illegal, immoral, or untrue in and of themselves, and that this is a much higher standard than any kind of transgression you would try to judge. But truth, the truth, we're trying to find out a truth of, did he have sex? And I guess we know that he had sex. And did he want to cover it up? And I guess we know that it's not unreasonable to imagine that, yes, a person would not want to be more and more explicit with details of sex. This kind of truth, to be going after this kind of truth in a legal or semi-legal or political way, is like saying, who stole the cookie? Who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? While perhaps in reality, as a child is being forced to tell if he did or didn't do it, if he did or didn't chop down the cherry tree, the one in control may be doing much graver kinds of things while ordering to know who stole the cookie. Graver kinds of things like humiliation, or referring to human beings as dumb, or criticizing unduly, or being unsupportive, or being very scolding. So we have hierarchies of what kind of truths we're talking about, what kind of so-called moral judgments we're making. And we're talking here about a very trivial kind of circumstance. And we're talking in the absence of mercy, love, and compassion. We're talking in the absence of fairness. That would we want such a thing to happen to ourselves? Does it not make us feel uneasy? We're also talking a kind of truth that could be paralleled to stealing food to eat. If you're very hungry and you're starving and you steal some food to eat, are you really stealing? Are you perjuring? Are you breaking the law? Are you really doing something terrible? Or are you stealing food to eat? If someone busts you for it and puts you in jail. Or if you are ordered to give a child over to another guardian after that child has been in your home and you are attached, maybe even adoptive of that child, and you are forced by law to give that child away and the child is crying and screaming, is that a kind of truth that you do what you're told to do, or are you doing greater harm in reality? Or I recall a movie called Madame Rosa, starring Simone Signoret, which was about the life of some certain prostitutes. And it showed that in the kind of life they led amongst themselves were so many compassionate and touching and committed and deep things that were of much higher order than the seeming veneer of the prostitute life they were involved in. And then I'm also reminded of a movie like Carrie. I've never really watched it completely, but I do have some idea of it. I don't find it to be all that good, but yet there are some principles in a movie like that, or a book like that, such that Carrie is very restricted by her mother to not do and not be certain kinds of ways, and certainly thwarted and condemned against regarding sex or looking attractive. And she has to follow these guidelines, and she's put upon extremely and harshly by her mother. But who's really doing the more harm? Is it the one who's not following these rules that are set down, or the very harsh and condemning and dynamically twisted parent on the matters of sex and attraction and what a girl should be allowed to do or not do? And I also heard someone say that truth is when you get the greatest good. Truth is when you get equal rights by what you're doing and equal treatment for everyone. The president is not getting equal treatment. He's getting very inhumane treatment by any standard. Today, when people are on trial or in circumstances where they are legally liable, they are treated very well. One does not dare to mistreat them. Yet the president and his wife are mistreated. Equal opportunity is the greatest good. Fairness, trying to be fair and open-minded and not dogmatic and not choosing any old way we'd like to feel and be and exert that on a situation. That has something to do with goodness and truth. And is there truth in the state inquiring into sex? Is there truth in something like that? What kind of truth is that? The only truth in that is that the state is inquiring into sex. The state in your bedroom. Is it truth if you try to keep sex private? That's a kind of truth. And I'm sure many of us can understand how not smart it would be to keep sex public. How not smart that would be. That is a truth. And what about the truth of people's motives as they pursue sex, as they pursue whether you won't yield and tell them details of sex? What about the people's motives in pushing you to this and using means that are not proper to get there? Yes, there are levels of purpose. What about purposes of keeping end users of drugs in jail for many years with very stiff sentences, while the main sellers of drugs, the main traffickers bringing us drugs all the time, are likely not in jail, but yet some end user can be in jail and drugs stay expensive? What kind of truths are we talking about when we go after these far-fetched and unrealistic, surreal domains? And also the rules of the game. Marriage, for example. Marriage is a convention and a custom. It's not about a morality, and it's not about a law per se, regarding the fidelity aspect of it. It's rules of the game instituted long ago. People who have examined this question have come up with ideas that marriage is an economic institution where you have a way for people to legally co-join and pass on economic assets, and also to legitimize children. So marriage is a convention and a custom, and in a world like ours, which is moving so fast, and in which a family and a married couple even has less and less time to be together and share experience and become more committed rather than less committed, and spend more time with outsiders than with significant others, technically significant others, marriage becomes more and more open-ended, as we know for a fact. Marriage becomes more a matter of divorce. And marriage becomes more a matter of love lost. And is it even wise to be married? Are we not learning? Look at the way we really are living behind our institutions, not just the person who is president. Is it wise to be married? Is it wise to have children under the wild circumstances we are living? And do we have to look to people as being the perfect marriage? And will this not be changing in the future? And yes, we project our own sense of being rejected, having love lost, denying problems that have occurred to us. We project our own problems. We scapegoat our own problems and seem to forget that it is us who have them to begin with. And it is us who have sex as much as does the president, considering how, when we first find out just the sexual aspect, we are so shocked to know about it. We are very denying. So while marriage is more of a convention and custom under great stress due to the environmental circumstances in which we find ourselves in this technological futuristic age, and nothing's going to change that in any foreseeable real way. So while we see this about marriage, we also might say that morality is not so much judging what a person is or isn't doing within the rules of a game called marriage in society's custom. Though one would not, of course, advocate people to not be faithful, to not get married to begin with, if they don't plan to be faithful, to be very careful, because this is what is increasingly apt to happen. But we might say that morality is a matter of how you treat people, and how you do or do not show them respect might be a measure of morality. Today also we don't have even a society to frame conventions and customs. Even conventions and customs are just flying by the wayside because we don't have a fixed system where we can get role-playing going and kinds of rules. All this is in a state of flux in this wild, fast world that we're living in, and that will not change as long as we are in the machine age in the future and in technology. In sum, beware of marriage. Step very, very tentatively in that direction in an age such as ours, because we are exposed to all kinds of circumstances and lifestyles that mitigate against that convention. And too bad for our children. Too bad for our children. Think most of all of not procreating without a decided sacrifice, and that's very hard to do in this day and age. A decided sacrifice to be married indefinitely, committed forever. Very hard today. Christianity is not a religion of persecution. It's not a religion of forcing faith and obedience. Back to Christianity. And if a person does not feel God, does not believe in that concept in her heart of hearts, What is more true? Is it the one who fears some puerile idea of eternal damnation, or one who has courage to try to lean on what she knows and feels to find her way, the one who is true in her heart, the one willing and needing to tackle fear and moral dilemma of pain and suffering, injustice and death head on? Yes, back to this idea of Christianity and truth. Christianity is not to coerce. Christianity is not to persecute. Christianity is not to force. Christianity is a matter of love. And when people don't hold Christianity in their heart, it's not because they're heathen, it's not because they haven't found some kind of truth, it's not because they can't discern what is true. What is most true is not what is most true, what is really in one's heart and soul, what is really deep within oneself, what one is willing to suffer with and take the courage and face uncertainty with, and find one's way as one truly can only find oneself to be able to do. Is that a kind of truth? Is that a kind of strength and courage and morality? Now we come to the matter of sex. Everybody's favorite topic, whether they like to be involved in it, whether they like to watch it, whether they like to experience it, whether they want to deny it and be far away from it. What makes the world go round? It's been said, sex and money, and the case can even be made for money boiling down to sex and the politics of experience. Of course, in psychology, it was the master psychologist, or psychiatrist, I should say, Sigmund Freud of Vienna, who sort of blew the lid off sex, so to speak, in the Victorian age when women wore long skirts and things had a veneer of being far more proper. But lo and behold, as Sigmund Freud was investigating people's personal lives, in as much as they would come in and talk to him in a free associative way very deeply, he found that the kinds of fantasies and hanky-pankies and sex ideas and practices that were not whatsoever at the upfront public or personal level, or even conscious level to boot. Things that were inside of people, but that they may not realize were, yet would come out of them some way, somehow, or that they could not bear to own up to. Or even situations of having been taken forcefully in sex, or having intimations of sexuality that were very powerful, as go on today, undercurrents or overcurrents of sexuality. Yes, sex, sex, sex. The chakras of the body, the energy parts of the body, the concentrated focal emissions and balance of energy are highly sexual in nature. As far as the biological animal goes, we are sexual beings. We live not only to reproduce, we live sexually, we are driven to be sexual, we have a great interest in sex, and sex and our nature are almost one and the same, including things that aren't literally sex, but yet are sensual, or substitutive, or come from that same impulse to sex. As we know too, in recent times, a lot more attention has been given to female sexuality than in the past, and females, or many females in general, are sort of becoming acquainted with ideas that they may be more enamored of sex than by heritage they might have realized or been able to admit in the past. Up till now, it's been very much considered from a male point of view. And of course, the dynamics and the dialectic of how each sex experiences sex, thinks about sex, is driven to sex or away from sex is different. And we won't go into that today, but we will talk, as concerns this case, of the persecuted human for his sex and not wanting to tell all about it. By the way, someone pointed out that if you have any kind of dignity and manners and proper comportment, from that point of view alone, you don't go and tell all about sex. So from the circumstance that the country finds itself in as far as sex goes, there are many things in the dynamic of what we're going through and sex and the dynamics of sex that come to bear on the situation. Number one is that sex for a long time and sex today is associated with guilt. In fact, a lot of the guilt you may experience, including free-floating guilt, though people are tending to become generally less guilty as we move into the future, the guilt that you tend to feel is most often stemming from certain feelings, conditionings, and maybe experiences that you might have had with sex. So guilt is very much a co-partner with sex. And that's how someone who's accused of sex can look so awful and need to be punished, which is another dynamic in the culture stemming from how we grew up and how we recreate the situation in our progeny, how it was handed to us from our ancestry to want to slap, to want to tease, to want to berate. And those things too can be related to sex if you really look at the broad picture and get very deeply intertwined into the psyche of human beings. Punishment. Punishment. In fact, some sexual practices are about punishment. We also have in our dynamic dirty, the idea that sex is dirty. That's very common. That's why when things about sex are told, people may often be going, oh God, they might be turning red. They might think it's not just plain old funny, it's kind of funny, it's guilty funny, it's dirty funny, it's sleazy funny, it's prurient. There are so many twists and turns to the dynamics of sex, and they're coming out in the way we're evolving in this situation. Sex is not just fornication. Sex is not just intercourse or any body touching between mature people for orgasmic experience. Sex is also sensuality. Sex is the baby sucking at the mother's breasts. The sensual experience of that, the warmth, the physicalness of that. Sex, as pointed out in psychoanalytic and psychodynamic psychology, is also about all the pleasures of the body, not just the so-called erogenous zones. And those include areas of the body having to do with elimination and defecation, as difficult as that may seem to understand. Sex is about the broad field of sensuality and fleshness and physicality and comfort and communion. Sex is flesh on flesh. Sex is people being in and of each other to a degree. Sex is also about domination. Sex is also ways of harming people by forcing them, or when you're having sex with them, doing it in a lustful and mean way inside your psyche. As we've seen movies, and we know particularly of males wanting to have sex in their minds, it's a downing, it's a felling, and you know, you see that they get a notch on the belt and move on, and it's mean and it's nasty. To the opposite sex. And sex is just plain old fun, and sex is about release. And sex is about energy and tension, and sex, yes, is about perversion. When we have fetishes of so many kinds and associations with pain and trauma and other kinds of complexities in the kind of sex that we may fantasize about or try to prevent ourselves from admitting or knowing, keep it in our unconscious, so to speak, or react to without really realizing it. Sex is also about beauty and love. Sex is our appetite. And this does not mean you have to walk around sexual, though, per se, literally. It just means it's our lust for life. It's our drive to be creative. Of course, you know, we know of all the fun that's been poked at people sometime of how they do walk around led by their literal sexual appetite. Sex is a vital energy, and if you are imbalanced regarding your sex, and that can come out in many kinds of ways, not just directly, you could be sick, you could be imbalanced, you could be misshapen to some degree in your psychological or physical universe. Sex is about intimate knowledge of each other. So sex is carnal, and sex is spiritual. And sex is about ownership. Sex is about possession, which it does not necessarily entail, and yet that is what we bring to it, unfortunately. And sex is sometimes about status. Who's sleeping with whom? Who gets recognized? And then we know how we as females often feel we have to have a male, at least in our beginning years as we go into adulthood. We want to have a male, and the whole drive to have a male. And we've even heard of some women who have to have married men and engaged men. No other men will do. And sex is for reproduction, and sex is used to get ahead. And sex is used to show that one can persuade another human into some kind of an act, the proof of it being sex. And sex is about validation. Sometimes not feeling numb, not feeling not alive, or feeling your humanity somehow, or feeling maybe rightly or wrongly, maybe logically or pathologically feeling validated in sex. Sex is a matter sometimes of compulsion, of needing to repeat it, of needing to do it as one washes one's hands many times over, or as one repeats certain phrases all the time in a need to do it, or tries to get people to do similar things for oneself. Sex can be a compulsion. Sex can be a matter of abuse, but there are so many kinds of abuse. And sex is a matter of need, just plain old human need. In the still of the night, in the darkness of despair, in the loneliness of the empty, silent room, sex is about human need, the humanness of needing another body to touch. Now look at our language regarding the pervasiveness of sex. Our language is perfused with words in all kinds of intercourse we have with each other that are based on sensual and sexual realities. I won't use the most famous word, which begins with the word F, and we know how we use that. We use that to talk about hurting the competition, being somehow done wrong or doing wrong to someone else, and yet that is based on a sexual act. We talk about the S word, which is based on the child sucking at the mother's breast. And what does that mean? That you're stupid, that you're doing something low, that you're down, and yet that comes out of your basic human biology and reality. We talk about screwing people, the twists we have about sex, and I could go on. The words are so numerous. having to do with erogenous zones and other biological zones of our body, which goes to show you where we have our feelings of guilt and shame and trepidation and hatred and dirtiness and spite, as our basic biology goes. And there are so many metaphors for sex as well. Things that we do that are not literally sex, but have as their basic root thrust sex behind them. Ways that we might flirt with each other, ways that artists might create in an orgiastic experience, ways that we might release tension in perhaps being driven to a frenzy in sport, getting satisfaction, ways we might get vicarious gratification through the sexual activities of others. So many metaphors for sex, they just abound in life, besides the basic sex act itself. And how many of our television shows and television commercials have in them sex resonating to us, getting to us, using that to get to us. I know of one commercial that comes to mind that recently played quite a bit, of a stockbroker service that would show a female in bed at night with just a sheet on her, and she wakes in the middle of the night needing something, takes just a sheet, presumably naked body, walks over somewhere to a computer, comes back satisfied, relieved, and says, "Oh, thank you," to the guy who's responsible for the brokerage house. So much could be picked apart about that and sex and males' prowess, or males putting themselves in a position of prowess regarding sex, and females. So sex is the ultimate, seeing each other naked. And oh, it's with guilt, with shame, since Adam and Eve, since shame, 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 humiliation, like in the movie Carrie, the mother, oh, you'll not be dirty, you'll not wear lipstick, you'll not do such devil things. And lewd from all the pent-up and perverse ways we have feelings about sex. And the way we like to look at it through peepholes. That's very intriguing, very voyeuristic. And the way we like to project and blame, and because it disgusts us a lot of time, it gives us a dis-ease or a dis-ease. It's like a malignancy. It's dirt. It's also a projection of our love lost and our own discretions and our own divorces and our own disappointments. So we project all this angst. Unfortunately, real human beings get to be persecuted as they live out things that should never come into the limelight, things that reasonable people would not want in the limelight, and things that should not be an object of state inquisition. Of course, in all of this, there's not much talk of love, and I would admit that sex without love is indeed very hollow, and I would not advise it, and yet these are the realities. In fact, people are living in sex or without sex, in marriages and commitments without love. And we know very much from the past how people could be married for many years, indeed produce many children, and never even really have a friendship, but yet somehow manage to have had sex, and how women could have headaches, and how women would hope that sex would be over, and this still goes on today. Now it's joked of how men would wish that sex would be over, like in Married with Children. Yes, so we have these drives, these sensualities, and they are repressed to a great degree. And no matter how much we grapple with trying to put them aside and think we can condemn them and sweep them away, sweep them under the rug, they reappear. That is one other thing that Freud pointed out so vividly in his time, how motives and drives that are repressed only find themselves squeezing through in some other way, shape, and form into some of the complexities and permutations that I mentioned about sex. The guilts, the shames, the humiliations. And we are a country with a heritage of Puritanism, which still goes on even though sex is plastered everywhere. We are highly puritanical in coming to grips with someone having sex, forgetting that that is us too. And we deride it. Yes, sex is not some dirty little thing to do under the sheets, and yet people can like to do dirty things and feel dirty when they do sex. So the country is hung up. Now, I even remember that Newt Gingrich, I believe, wrote a book, which I did not see or read, but in it I believe he had something about fantasies of sex. So it had sex and adventure, high adventure, espionage, or that kind of a thing, and lots of sex and fantasy, something that was sort of a science fiction book, I believe. Yes, that was from the pen of Newt Gingrich. So, we come to the idea once again of condemnation, condemning people for their sexual drives, condemning people as something separate from us, not like ourselves, worthy of rebuke, worthy of spite, worthy to be hated, from a so-called Christian mentality, which is not Christian. And we have a prosecutor, we have an inquisitor named Kenneth Starr, who seems to have lost control with sex, as people have said about the report, this thing he calls a report that he put out. It could have been written in 1 or 2 pages just saying that the president is seen to have had sex, there's A, B, and C evidence of it, we believe that he lied about this, or as he likes to use the word perjured, which I say I don't believe is the case whatsoever, technically and de facto from a reasonable point of view. He could have just written all of that and maybe given a few examples of why he says that, and yet he put out sex after sex after sex after sex, and now we go through all the details, and we're going to go through some more, and they don't want to let go. People don't want to let go. Yes, and the person who's president has been called the sexiest man, I hear, by magazines. So given all of that, what about women in this situation? What about women and where they're going from here on in, or where they've been? What about women and men who want to get together? Do they have a right, if the state is looking into the crime of sex, of people having sex? Do men and women who want to have sex with each other have a right to have that? And do they have a right to remain private about it, to remain quiet about it? If they have not committed a crime, can they be said to be making a crime by not divulging the sex they've had or are having? I know of a book called Megacore of a very achieved, a fiction book, but the idea being a very achieved female executive who is single and, as males have for so long, goes about as she feels sexual, having liaison with males that she doesn't stick with, but neither side sticks with each other and knows what these get-togethers are about. Now, I'm not advising this way to be living, and I'm not advising that sex without love is a worthy concept or a worthy enterprise, but are people going to be free to engage in the liaisons that they feel they want to engage in in a sexual way, or are they going to be interfered with? And are women going to be able to find their way to whomever and acknowledge the ways that they do go after men, and acknowledge that if they're using some of the ways that they are as something they have to do because they want to get ahead, or this is the way they've learned to be, are they going to learn a new way? Are they going to stand up and take a different direction and move ahead according to some stricter standard of how they're going to comport themselves to get where they're going, and not blame males, or not have their situations be blamed on males? How long can that go on? As the saying goes, it takes two to tango. Could there also be some issues of jealousy here, that if the person who is president has been called a very sexy man, that he is going to be shown who's so sexy and who's getting away with this stuff? And if the person is a very sexy man, according to some people, he is going to be condemned to hell, to fire and brimstone, for being such a bad person. Now, when I was at the area where the president was coming recently, and people had gathered, there were people, the naysayers there, some of them, again, I said they were Christian, quite a few of them, that had signs condemning him, but that were making a lot of jokes. They were carrying cigars. They had some of them were male, and their wives were there, and they were talking about how would you like what is called a B blank 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 job, and laughing about it and snickering about it, and fondling the cigars. And then someone had made a mistake on a sign and had no N in the word Clinton, and someone was saying, what does that mean? Clinton, Clinton, and saying this, one of these naysayers. And oh, the males were having such fun being sleazy, just loving it. And then one of these people shouted out to people favorable to the president, you whore, to the female. And the women had no problem, maybe, to be having sex with these same males later on, I take it. And you hear people on TV, again to the Imus show, saying to some reporter, female calling in, sounds like phone sex to me, having a song on the show saying he put his pecker in her mouth. Right on MSNBC, and having fun with it, loving it. To me, that is lewd. That is lewd. Privacy, flesh on flesh of two people willing, ready and able to keep quiet, that could be holy. But to me, these displays are lewd. And if you think about it, you could see how that is logically so. One station announced the other day, when we come up with our next segment, we are going to take a look inside the blouse of Monica at her heart. What a thrill. And so many of us are right here, ready to ejaculate, ready to orgasm, but not ready to accept the communion and spiritualism and the art of love and the fortitude. And we're ready to tell and blab, but we're not ready to respect two people alone in a private relation. Sex rules, TV rules. Our lowest motives are played to, and we are prostituting ourselves, another sexual word, to false gods. And the word God, God, God is coming up all the time now. We are coming to a close here, so these would be my final comments. I would say to the person who is president, do not grovel, do not beg, do not humiliate yourself, do not be a scapegoat, which I believe is his true inclination, if not called otherwise by his so-called party. And most of all, do not be moved. And I would say to Hillary Clinton, with all her human frailties and yes, sin, like every one of us, that you are an example of dignity and hard work and determination. And both yourself and Mr. Clinton show grace under pressure, a very high standard of behavior. And in some, you are a lot to see for what you really are, but you are also a lot to admire. And that I hearken back to the apes and how males have a hierarchy of domination, the highest ones getting the most females, and how all the other apes are in continual challenge to the highest males and the females that they automatically get. I would also say that you have to practice to be fair. You can't come forward with any old dogma in any old way you like to feel it, a hatred or an animosity. You have to practice to be fair. I'm telling I have to leave here, so I would say, better be hip to your rights, better vote. And does the country have a problem with how to treat people and not telling about sex? Yes, it does. Thanks for watching. Please tune in again.